When I close my eyes, I can still hear the waves outside that old beach house, soft and steady, like the heartbeat of my past. The smell of salt water and grilled corn used to fill every summer evening there. Back then, that house wasn't just a property. It was a promise, one my late husband, Charles, made to me when we were still young and full of plans. Charles built it himself, with help from 2 of his brothers and a handful of stubborn old tools. He used to say, "Marjorie, this place will always be our safe shore, no matter what storms come." And for nearly 30 years, it was. Our daughter, Tina, learned to walk on those floors. I can still picture her, chubby legs, tiny yellow swimsuit, running across the sand while I tried to keep up. That beach house held every version of her: the laughing toddler, the moody teenager, the college graduate who swore she'd never live a life as simple as her parents. I didn't blame her for wanting more. That's every mother's hope, isn't it? That her child reaches higher. But sometimes reaching higher makes people forget where the ground is. When Charles passed, the house changed for me. It was still beautiful, sun-soaked porch, blue shutters, our initials carved into the railing. But it became quiet in a way that hurt. I started spending my weekends there alone, just to keep the place from fading. I'd sit by the window with my tea, watching the tide roll in, telling myself he was still out there somewhere, just past the horizon. Then Tina started visiting again. At first, it warmed my heart. She'd bring flowers or a bottle of wine and talk about her new job, her new friends, her husband, Derek. He was charming in that slick way some men are, always a smile, always a plan. He sold houses for a living, and I guess that made him see every piece of land as something with a price tag. The first time he saw the beach house, I caught the look in his eyes. Not wonder, calculation. He smiled and said, "Mrs. Carter, this place could be worth a fortune now. You're sitting on gold." I laughed it off, but Tina didn't. Over the months, her visits started sounding more like business meetings. She'd ask, "Mom, do you really need 2 homes? You could sell this one and live easier." I'd tell her the same thing every time. "Tina, this isn't just a house. It's where your father still lives." She'd roll her eyes, call me sentimental, and move on. At first, I thought it was harmless talk. The kind of thing children say when they think their parents don't understand the modern world. But slowly, I started noticing small changes. She began asking questions about my accounts, about the property taxes, about who handled my paperwork. "Mom, you should let me help," she'd say. "You're not good with this stuff." I wanted to believe she was just being helpful. But deep down, something felt off. There's a quiet moment that comes to every mother. When you realize your child isn't looking at you with love anymore, but with calculation. I didn't want to believe it then. I still remember the last summer we all spent there together. Me, Tina, and Derek. We grilled shrimp on the porch, and I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've imagined all this. But later that night, I woke up to whispers coming from the kitchen. Tina's voice, sharp and low. "Once it's signed, she can't take it back. She won't even notice." And Derek's reply, "Exactly. Just keep her calm until then." I stayed in bed, heart pounding. The sound of the ocean outside suddenly felt distant, like the world was pulling away. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just listened. And something inside me went cold. The next morning, Tina acted normal. She kissed my cheek, said she loved me, and drove back to the city. I smiled and waved, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was already planning what to do next. When you're my age, you learn that love doesn't mean blindness. It means patience, the kind that lets you see people clearly, even when you wish you couldn't. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen, a notepad, and a glass of sweet tea. I wrote down everything I remembered from their conversation, every word that made my stomach twist. Then I called a friend, my husband's old lawyer, Mr. Jacobs. He picked up on the second ring. "Marjorie," he said, his voice warm but cautious, "it's been a long time." "It has," I said softly, "but I think I need your help again." He didn't ask why. Not at first. He just listened as I told him about Tina's questions, about Derek's whispers, about the uneasy feeling that had been sitting in my chest for months. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You were right to call. Me. That was the night I stopped being the mother who trusted too much. and became the woman who would quietly rewrite her own ending. Tina was always the kind of girl who believed she knew more than everyone else, especially me. From the time she was 16, she had a way of making everything sound like a lesson, except she was the one teaching and I was the one meant to learn. "Mom, you're too trusting," she'd tell me. "People will take advantage of you." Funny thing, she turned out to be one of those people. After I spoke with Mr. Jacobs, I didn't tell anyone. I learned long ago that silence is a weapon if you hold it steady enough. He advised me to bring all my property documents to his office. I kept them in a small fireproof safe, the kind Charles and I bought years ago when we first started saving seriously. Inside were the deeds, insurance papers, and one worn photo of Charles hammering the porch beams of the beach house. His smile still gave me courage. When I brought everything to Mr. Jacobs, he flipped through the pages carefully, glasses sliding down his nose. "Everything's still in your name," he said, "but your daughter's been getting copies of your tax bills and mail. You give her permission for that?" My stomach tightened. "She said she was helping with the taxes," he nodded slowly. "Help can be dangerous when it comes with a signature." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how Tina had started calling more often lately. Every conversation was sprinkled with little digs. "Mom, you shouldn't live alone down there. You really need someone to manage all that space. You'd feel freer if you sold." It wasn't concern. It was persuasion, and like most persuasion, it came wrapped in sugar. Then there was Derek. He'd call me Mom with that salesman grin, full of fake warmth. He had a way of making compliments sound like transactions. "Mrs. Carter, you've got an eye for good property. You and Charles really knew what you were doing," he'd say, walking through the beach house like he was appraising it, and when I'd ask him if he wanted some tea, he'd smile and add, "I'll take a cup in the kitchen, where I can look over the view." It's strange how people reveal themselves in the quiet moments. He never looked at the ocean. He looked at the walls, the structure, the space. I told myself it was just his line of work, but deep down, I could feel it. That man wasn't admiring my home. He was calculating it. A few weeks later, Tina showed up at my city apartment with a binder under her arm. "Mom," she said, dropping it onto the table, "I've organized your bills for you. You don't need to worry about a thing anymore." The binder had tabs, utilities, insurance, property, taxes. Everything looked so tidy, so caring. "But I didn't touch it. You did all this for me?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. She smiled. "Of course. You've done enough. You deserve to relax." Relax. That word used to mean peace. Now it sounded like surrender. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Tina, I appreciate it. But I'll handle my affairs myself." Her smile faltered. Just a flicker. Then she laughed, too loud. "Mom, come on. You don't even like using the internet. You're not going to do all this alone." "I managed just fine before," I said, taking the binder and placing it back in her hands. "And I'll manage again." Something in her face hardened. For a moment, she wasn't my daughter. She was a stranger with my eyes, cold and distant. She stood up, adjusted her purse strap, and said, "Fine, do it your way. But don't say I didn't try to help." Then she left without hugging me. When the door closed, I sat there staring at the spot she'd just been. I thought about all the years I spent teaching her kindness, humility, gratitude, and how easily she'd traded them for ambition. The next morning, I called Mr. Jacobs again. "Let's make sure everything I own is ironclad," I told him. He suggested creating a trust that would protect my assets, something Tina couldn't touch or transfer without my consent. We spent hours going over details, sealing every loophole. Meanwhile, Tina and Derek kept up appearances, family dinners, small talk, smiles. But there was always a certain calculation behind their eyes, a quiet impatience. They wanted results. One Sunday evening, while we were having dinner at my apartment, Derek casually brought up real estate trends. "You know, Mrs. Carter, beach properties are peaking right now. If you ever thought about selling, this would be the time." I looked at him, my fork frozen midair. "I'm not selling, Derek." He smiled like it was a joke. "Of course not. Just saying, you could make a killing." Tina jumped in quickly. "Derek, don't bother Mom with that. She's sentimental about that place." But her tone wasn't defending me. It was warning him to stay subtle. When they left that night, I walked to my window and watched their car pull away. The city lights flickered across the hood as they drove off. Two people who thought they were smarter than the woman who raised one of them. I whispered to myself, "You taught her everything, except how to respect you." The next time I saw Tina, she brought Derek along to the beach house for a weekend getaway. They smiled, laughed, played the part of the loving couple. But when I caught them quietly snapping photos of the rooms and checking the foundation, my stomach dropped. I excused myself, stepped outside, and called Mr. Jacobs right from the porch. "It's time," I said. "Go ahead with the papers." He knew what I meant. That night, I sat under the stars, the waves crashing softly in the distance. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Whatever storm was coming, I'd be ready. If someone had told me years ago that my daughter would someday treat me like a business transaction, I'd have laughed in their face. But life has a cruel way of showing you that family isn't immune to greed. It just knows how to disguise it better. After that weekend at the beach house, things started to shift quietly, like sand moving underfoot. Tina became unusually attentive, calling every few days, offering to check on things for me, dropping off meals I didn't ask for. On the surface, it looked like love, but under it all, I could feel the rhythm of manipulation, soft, careful, rehearsed. "Mom," she'd say sweetly, "you shouldn't drive all the way down there alone anymore. Derek and I can handle the property stuff. You just relax." Relax? There it was again, that word she used when she wanted control. Derek started showing up more too. He'd linger near my dining table, flipping through papers I hadn't given him permission to touch. "Just being helpful, Mrs. Carter," he'd say with that charming grin that made my stomach twist. "I want to make sure everything's in order for you." And Tina would nod, like they were doing me a favor. One evening, she showed up with a stack of folders and a shiny pen. "Mom, we should really make things easier for you," she began, setting the papers down between us. "These are just authorizations, stuff that'll help me manage bills, property maintenance, and taxes, so you don't have to stress." I didn't reach for the pen. I just looked at her. "You know, your father used to say the day a family needs paperwork to prove love is the day that family starts to fall apart." She forced a laugh, but her eyes flickered. "Mom, this isn't about that. It's about being responsible." "Then let me be responsible for myself," I said, my tone even but firm. That was the first time she showed frustration, not the childish kind, but the adult kind that comes when someone's plan hits a wall. "You don't trust me," she said sharply. I met her gaze. "I trust you to look after your own interests." "That's what you've been doing lately, isn't it?" For a moment she didn't answer. Then she smiled tightly and said, "Fine, Mom. Keep doing everything yourself. But when you get overwhelmed, don't call me." She grabbed her purse and left without another word. I sat there a long time, staring at the unsigned papers on my table. The pen was still sitting there, a little piece of silver that caught the light like a trap. I almost laughed. She'd brought her own pen, as if she was sure I'd sign. That night, I called Mr. Jacobs again. "She's getting bold," I told him. He sighed. "You were right to prepare early. I'll make sure the trust documents are finalized this week." By the time I hung up, I felt calmer. There's a certain peace that comes when you realize you can protect yourself without shouting. The next few weeks passed quietly. I didn't confront Tina. I didn't have to. She believed she'd worn me down. Every few days she'd drop by, acting sweeter than usual, bringing me flowers, hugging me a little too long, complimenting my clothes. It was almost convincing. One afternoon, while I was making tea, I caught her in my office, rifling through my desk drawers. She jumped when she saw me. "Oh, Mom!" "I was just looking for stamps." I smiled politely. "Top drawer, right-hand side." She blushed and mumbled something about being late for a meeting. But I noticed what she was holding before she set it down, a copy of my property tax notice. When she left, I went straight to the safe and checked everything. The original documents were untouched, but I knew now that she'd been digging for copies, something she could use without me noticing. I decided not to move the papers. Instead, I placed a single fake document inside a labeled envelope where I knew she'd find it if she came snooping again. It wasn't illegal, just clever. Mr. Jacobs helped me draw it up, a harmless, outdated property deed that looked official enough to satisfy curious eyes. 3 days later, while I was in the garden, I saw her sneaking into my study again through the window reflection. That's when I knew. She'd found the bait. The next morning she called. Her tone was cheerful, too cheerful. "Mom, Derek and I have been talking. We think it's time to start preparing the beach house for the market. You'll get such a good deal, and we'll handle all the paperwork." "Oh, you will?" I asked, feigning confusion. "I thought you didn't want to deal with any more of my business," she laughed softly. "We were just trying to give you space, Mom, but we want to help. You trust us, right?" I almost choked on my coffee. "Of course, sweetheart. Just let me know what you need." When we hung up, I sat there in silence for a long time. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was sad. Sad that my daughter had become the kind of person who mistook kindness for weakness. That evening, I went through my files again, carefully making sure every true document was safe. I replaced one more fake copy in the set she'd seen last. It was an old transfer record, one that made it look like the house was in her name. I knew she'd think she'd found her golden ticket. I'll never forget the way they walked through that front door. Tina with her sunglasses perched high on her head, Derek carrying a clipboard like he was there to assess damage instead of visit family. They called it a weekend getaway, but I knew better. People don't bring measuring tapes and notepads to relax. The air that day was heavy with salt and secrets. The sun hit the water just right, that kind of blinding gold Charles used to love. But I couldn't enjoy it. Not with those two circling my living room like vultures pretending to admire the view. "This place is even better than I remembered," Derek said, pacing slowly, tapping a pen against the clipboard. "The market's booming for waterfront properties like this, Marjorie." "You could get triple what you paid," I smiled politely. "We never bought it," I said. "We built it." He laughed softly, brushing past my correction like it didn't matter. Tina trailed behind him, her manicured nails tapping along the banister her father carved. "It really is a lot of space for one person, Mom," she said lightly. "Don't you ever get lonely here?" I didn't answer. I just poured her tea and placed the cup in front of her. "Loneliness isn't the same as peace, dear. You'll understand that one day." She gave a small, patronizing smile, the same one she used to give when I'd mix up a phone setting or misplace my glasses. That subtle little smirk that said, "You're outdated. You're in my way." For a while, we played house, chatting about small things, watching the tide, pretending the tension wasn't coiling between us. But as the day went on, I noticed how their eyes lingered on corners, on details. Derek took photos of the deck for renovation ideas, and Tina wandered into my office to make a call. When she came back, she looked lighter, too light, like someone who'd just confirmed something important. That night, we grilled dinner on the porch like old times. The sky bled orange over the water, the smell of smoke mixing with sea breeze. I watched Tina laugh at one of Derek's jokes, her head tilted just the way mine used to when Charles made me blush. For a split second, I saw the daughter I raised, bright, warm, full of promise. Then she asked the question. "Mom," she said casually, slicing through her steak, "have you thought more about what we discussed? About maybe selling this place?" I set my fork down. "You two have been thinking a lot about my property lately." Tina chuckled nervously. "We just want what's best for you." I met her gaze. "And what's best for me just happens to make you richer." Her fork froze midair. Derek stepped in with that salesman's smile again. "Now, Mrs. Carter, that's not fair. We're just looking out for you. You shouldn't have to deal with maintenance and taxes at your age." "At my age," I repeated quietly. "You mean the same age your father was when he rebuilt that deck last summer before he died?" Silence. Even the ocean seemed to pause. Tina forced a laugh. "Mom, please. We're just talking." "Talking is fine," I said, standing up slowly. "Scheming isn't." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, and I knew. She was hiding something. After dinner, I cleaned the dishes while they sat in the living room, whispering. Every so often, I heard words drift through the air: contract, closing date, transfer. Around midnight, I pretended to go to bed, but instead I sat in the hallway listening. "I told you she's suspicious," Derek muttered. "We have to act fast. If she figures it out—" "She won't," Tina whispered back. "I've got the paperwork ready. Once it's signed, it'll look like she agreed to everything. She doesn't even know what she's got anymore." My breath caught. The words cut sharper than glass. She doesn't even know what she's got anymore. They didn't realize that I knew exactly what I had, and exactly what I was about to lose if I stayed quiet. When I finally went to bed, I didn't cry. Not one tear. I just stared at the ceiling and thought about every sacrifice I'd made for that girl. The nights I worked 2 jobs so she could go to college. The years I went without new clothes, vacations, even decent furniture, just so she could have what I never did. And now, all she saw when she looked at me was an obstacle to something shiny. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. If she wanted to play smart, I'd let her think she was smarter. When they left that afternoon, she hugged me tightly, too tightly. "I'll call you soon, Mom," she said. "I'll be waiting," I replied softly. The moment their car disappeared down the road, I called Mr. Jacobs. "It's happening," I said. He didn't sound surprised. "You did the right thing. Just keep playing along. The trap's already set." That night, I sat on the porch with Charles' old cardigan around my shoulders, watching the waves roll in. The air was calm, almost forgiving. Somewhere deep inside, I felt his presence. Steady, reassuring, like he was saying, "You've got this, Marjorie. Let her think she's winning." The phone rang just after 10 a.m. that Tuesday morning. I remember because I was sitting on the porch, shelling peas and listening to the sound of the waves brushing against the rocks. The air smelled of salt and rosemary from the little garden Charles planted years ago. It was the kind of morning that made you believe peace could last forever, until the voice on the other end tore it apart. "Hi, Mom," Tina chirped, her tone so bright it felt artificial. "Guess what? We're moving tomorrow." I froze, a pea slipping from my hand. "Moving? To where?" "Oh, we found a new place closer to the city," she said breezily. "It's perfect. You'll love it. But listen, there's something else. I went ahead and sold your beach house." "Isn't that great?" For a moment, I didn't breathe. The words didn't make sense at first. They floated around me like pieces of broken glass, catching the light. "You what?" I asked, my voice steady, too steady. "I sold it," she repeated, excitement lacing her voice. "I took care of everything. You don't have to worry about taxes or maintenance anymore. Derek handled the buyers, and the deal's already done. We got such a great offer. You should thank me." I let out a small laugh, the kind that sounds warm but feels like steel. "You sold my beach house?" "Yes," she said, slower now, as if I wasn't following. "Mom, don't be mad. It's for the best. You'll be free of all that stress, and the money's already moving through." "Through what?" I interrupted quietly. She hesitated. "Through the account. Derek set it up. You'll get the paperwork later today," I smiled to myself. The calm in my voice wasn't natural. It was the kind that comes when you've already seen the knife and decided which hand to catch it with. "Tina," I said softly. "You forgot one thing." Her laughter faltered. "What are you talking about?" "You should check who actually owned that house." Silence. Long, sharp, uncomfortable silence. Then a nervous little chuckle. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. It's in your name. We've seen the documents." "I'm sure you have," I said, still smiling. "But the ones you've seen aren't the ones that matter." There was a pause. I could hear the way she inhaled, sharp and quick. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, sweetheart," I said gently, "you should really read what you sign before handing it to a buyer. You might find out you just sold the wrong house." The sound she made next was somewhere between a gasp and a choke. "What do you mean, the wrong house?" But I didn't answer. I simply said, "Good luck with the move, dear," and hung up. For the next few minutes, I just sat there, staring out at the water, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from something else, vindication, relief, maybe even grief. Because when you love someone deeply, it doesn't feel good to outsmart them. It just feels necessary. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Then again, 6 calls, 12 messages, one after another. I didn't answer a single one. I wanted her to sit in that silence, the same kind she'd given me when she decided to play with my life behind my back. By noon, my lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, called. "Well," he said, sounding half amused, half exasperated, "it looks like your daughter's in for quite a surprise. The title office contacted me this morning. Apparently there's some confusion about the property deed she submitted." "Confusion," I repeated, trying not to smile. She sold the house under her name. But the property listed wasn't the beach house. I could almost hear the smirk in his voice. "It was her own," he said. "The one she and Derek live in." The legal transfer went through cleanly since everything was signed under her authorization. The buyers think they purchased your beach property, but what they actually bought was hers. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. So it's official? As official as it gets. By tomorrow morning, she won't have a house to move into, just a pile of her own bad decisions. I leaned back in my chair, letting the sound of the sea carry away my thoughts. It wasn't joy I felt, not really. It was something quieter, heavier, justice settling into place like dust after a storm. That night, Tina drove down to the beach house. I knew she would. I saw her headlights flash through the curtains before I even heard the car. She didn't knock. She barged in, eyes wide, voice trembling. "What did you do, Mom?" I looked up from my book. "What did you do, sweetheart?" "You tricked me. You switched the deeds." I set the book down slowly. "No, I protected what your father built." "You're the one who tried to steal it," her voice cracked. "We're losing everything." "I already lost everything once," I said softly. When I realized my own daughter cared more about a sale than her mother. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "Leave Tina," I said quietly, "before I call the sheriff. I've already spoken to my lawyer. Everything was legal. Every signature, every form. You sold what belonged to you." Her face twisted in disbelief, then rage, then something smaller, regret maybe. She turned, stumbled toward the door, and for a moment I thought she might look back. But she didn't. When her car disappeared down the dirt road, I walked out onto the porch, barefoot, and looked at the stars reflecting on the water. Charles always used to say, "A man reaps what he sows." I guess he never imagined our daughter would prove him right so completely. The morning after that call, the ocean was calm. Too calm. The kind of stillness that settles right before the tide turns. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the sunlight crawl across the porch where Tina used to play as a little girl. It's strange, the way memory fights against disappointment. Even after everything, my heart still wanted to see the baby who used to run barefoot through the sand, not the woman who'd tried to sell my home. But life doesn't let you rewrite what people become. By noon, Mr. Jacobs called again. "It's all unfolding exactly as expected," he said. "The buyers contacted us. They're furious, of course. They realize the property Tina sold isn't yours, it's hers. And they've already filed a complaint against her and Derek for fraud." I stirred my coffee slowly. "Did she call you?" "She tried," he said dryly. "But Marjorie, you're in the clear. Every document is properly notarized. Every signature authenticated. You couldn't be safer if you tried." "I didn't want to ruin her," I murmured. "I just wanted her to stop," he sighed. "Sometimes stopping means letting them fall on their own." After we hung up, I walked into my study and opened the safe, the same one Charles and I had kept all our important papers in. Inside were 2 folders, one labeled House, Trust Ownership, Active, and the other Transfer Proposal, Tina, Revoked. It all started months ago, the night I overheard her whispering in the kitchen. I remember sitting in my room afterward, hands shaking, heartbreaking, thinking about how to protect myself without destroying her. I wasn't angry then. I was just tired. The next day, I drove into town and met with Mr. Jacobs in his quiet little office above the pharmacy. He'd been our lawyer for 30 years, saw us through buying our first car, the will, the house insurance, everything. When he saw me, he took off his glasses and said, "You've got that look, Marjorie. What's going on?" I told him everything, every whispered plan, every signature she tried to push, every visit that suddenly felt like surveillance. He listened without interrupting, his fingers pressed together, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Do you want to confront her?" he asked gently, "or outsmart her?" I smiled faintly. "Let's just say I want to make sure she learns what she's playing with." That's when he suggested the trust. We drew up the paperwork together, simple but airtight. The beach house would no longer be in my direct name. It would belong to the Carter Family Legacy Trust, which only I had the authority to manage. The trust was designed to make the house untouchable by anyone else, no matter what paper they signed. Then came the clever part. For tax purposes, and a touch of poetic symmetry, we temporarily placed Tina and Derek's home under my ownership on record, just for the duration of a joint tax filing structure that Derek himself suggested months earlier. They'd signed off on it without reading the fine print. So when Tina thought she was transferring ownership of my beach house to her buyers, she was really transferring the one in her own name, the one I'd been holding on paper all along. She hadn't tricked me. She'd tricked herself. I remember sitting with Mr. Jacobs in that office when the final documents were stamped. He looked at me over his glasses and said, "You realize this is going to sting when she finds out?" I nodded. Good. Maybe it'll wake her up. Back in the present, as I sat in that same chair by the window, I heard my phone buzz again. Tina's name flashed on the screen. I didn't answer. A few moments later, a message came through. "Mom, please. We need to talk. Derek says they're threatening legal action." I didn't mean for it to go this far. I stared at the words for a long time. There it was. I didn't mean for it to go this far. They always say that, don't they? As if betrayal has a safe distance. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Some lessons don't come from lectures. They come from consequences. By evening, I got another call. This time from Derek. His voice was tight, panicked. "Mrs. Carter, we can fix this. You just need to transfer the beach house back under your name, and we can undo everything. I'll make the buyers a new offer. No one needs to get hurt here." I almost laughed. "You already hurt yourselves, Derek. You just didn't feel it until now." He tried again, desperation leaking through his words. "They're going to sue us, you understand? We could lose everything." "You already did," I said softly, and hung up. The house was quiet again, peaceful. The only sound was the ocean breathing outside, steady and strong. I looked around the living room, at the photographs, the wooden beams, the framed shell collection Tina made when she was 5. For a moment, I felt something shift inside me. I'd protected my home, yes, but I'd also buried something deeper. That last flicker of hope that she'd ever see me as more than a signature on a deed. I walked outside and sat on the porch, the sky streaked with pink and gold. The world looked just like it did in the years when life was simple, before greed built walls between us. Somewhere out there, my daughter was realizing that the papers she'd never read were the ones that would teach her the hardest lesson of her life. The first domino fell the next morning, right around breakfast. I was spreading butter on toast when my phone started ringing. First once, then twice, then over and over again, until I finally turned it face down on the table. The house was filled with that faint, nervous silence that always comes before bad news arrives. When I finally checked the screen, it wasn't Tina calling. It was her lawyer. And beneath that, a dozen missed calls from Derek. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I took a slow sip of my coffee and looked out at the ocean. The sky was cloudy that morning, soft gray and full of distance. I couldn't help but think how fitting it was. Storms come slow, but they always come. When the phone rang again, I picked up just to end the noise. "Mrs. Carter," a stiff male voice said. "This is Paul Jennings representing Tina and Derek Reynolds. I believe there's been some confusion regarding property ownership." "Confusion?" I repeated lightly. "That's one way to put it." He cleared his throat. "They tell me you misled them about the deed to your beach house. They're facing potential fraud charges over a property sale that apparently wasn't the one they intended to sell." I smiled faintly. "Mr. Jennings, you're a lawyer. You of all people should know. The only way to sell a property you don't own is if you never checked who did. And if they didn't read the documents, that's not fraud. That's foolishness." There was a pause on the line. "So you're confirming the documents were legitimate?" "As legitimate as the signatures they provided," he exhaled sharply. "You understand this could financially ruin them?" "I understand actions have consequences," I said softly. "If you need a statement for the record, I'm happy to provide one." And that was that. He mumbled something about reviewing legal options before hanging up. 10 minutes later, Tina called. Her voice was different this time, no confidence, no edge. Just raw panic. "Mom, please. You have to fix this." "Fix what?" I asked, pretending not to understand. "The sale. The house. The buyers are threatening to sue us. Derek says it's all a misunderstanding." "Is it?" I asked quietly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like greed finally found its reflection." "Mom, please don't do this," she cried. "We'll lose our home." "You lost your home," I said gently, "the moment you decided mine was yours to sell." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear her breathing, shallow, fast, desperate. I thought, I thought I was helping, she whispered. I laughed softly. You were helping yourself, Tina. There's a difference. Then, in the smallest voice, she said, Derek told me it was fine. He said you'd never find out. Ah, there it was. The quiet confession I'd been waiting for. Not because I needed to hear it, but because I wanted her to hear herself say it. I see, I said. So you didn't just betray me. You followed someone else's lead to do it. Mom, I didn't let her finish. You chose him over the truth, over me, over your father's legacy, and now you get to live with that choice. I hung up. It wasn't anger that made me do it. It was mercy. Sometimes, letting a person fall is the only way they ever stand again. For the rest of that week, I watched the chaos unfold from a distance. My lawyer kept me updated. The buyers were suing for breach of contract. Derek's firm was under investigation for unethical sales practices, and Tina's credit accounts were frozen pending the settlement. Meanwhile, I kept tending my garden, taking my walks, and drinking my tea on the porch. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail, certified, official-looking, the kind of envelope that usually carries bad news. Inside was a brief notice from the county clerk confirming what I already knew. Ownership of the beach house was fully secured under the Carter Family Legacy Trust, unencumbered and legally protected. Below that, another line caught my eye, property at 214 Maple Lane, registered to Tina Reynolds, sold and transferred in full. Buyer assumes possession within 30 days. I traced the words with my finger, slow and deliberate. That was her house, the one she'd thought she'd keep after betraying me, the one she'd lost with her own signature. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, something Charles and I used to save for special occasions. I stepped out onto the porch as the sky turned deep orange and the waves rolled heavy against the shore. The world was quiet again, not the quiet of loneliness, the quiet of closure. Later that night, I got one last message from Derek. Mrs. Carter, I know you think you won, but you've destroyed your own family for a house. I hope you can live with that. I read it twice, then deleted it. Because I wasn't the one who destroyed this family, I'd just refused to let it destroy me. It was late afternoon when I saw the car pull into my driveway. A silver sedan I knew too well. Derek was in the driver's seat, head bowed, fingers gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding him together. Tina stepped out slowly, wearing sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of her choices had finally settled on her shoulders. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other through the screen door. Neither of us moved, then I opened it. If you're here to yell, you can turn right back around, I said evenly. She took off her glasses, revealing eyes rimmed red from crying. Mom, please. I'm not here to fight. I stepped aside without speaking, motioning for her to come in. Derek stayed in the car, staring straight ahead like a man waiting for a sentence. Tina stood in the middle of my living room, the same room she'd once decorated with birthday banners for me, the same space where we used to dance barefoot when she was little. But now it felt colder, emptier. Sit, I said softly. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling in her lap. I could hear the waves outside, steady, calm, unbothered. Mom, she began, voice breaking. I made a mistake. I folded my arms. A mistake is forgetting to call on your birthday. This was theft, Tina, her face crumpled. I didn't mean to steal from you. Derek said. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. It's always Derek, isn't it? The man you married was clever, yes, but not clever enough to read the fine print. Neither of you were, she flinched. We were desperate, okay? Derek lost money on an investment, and I thought, you thought I'd never notice if you stole from me, I interrupted sharply. You thought your mother was too old, too soft, too sentimental to see what was happening? Please, she whispered, tears spilling now. I'll do anything. Just tell the buyers it was a mistake. We can fix it. I stared at her for a long time. The girl I'd once carried in my arms, the one who used to draw seashells and leave them on my pillow. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask what part of her heart turned cold enough to justify betrayal. Instead, I walked to the cabinet, pulled out a folder, and set it on the table between us. Do you know what this is? I asked. She shook her head. These are the trust papers your father and I started years ago, but never finished. I revived them months ago when I realized what you were up to. Every single asset I have, the beach house, my savings, my insurance, it's all under this trust, which means legally you never had access to any of it. Her lip quivered. You planned this? No, I said. I protected myself. She looked away, ashamed. Derek said it would be simple. Just transfer some titles, handle the sale quietly. He said it was legal. Derek also said he could outsmart an old woman, I said dryly. But he didn't count on the fact that this old woman reads everything she signs. She started sobbing then, quiet, guttural sobs that filled the silence between us. Mom, she whispered through tears, I didn't want to hurt you. I just thought, maybe if we sold it, you'd finally let go. That place has always been more important to you than me. That one cut deep. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I took a deep breath and sat across from her. You couldn't be more wrong, I said softly. That house isn't important because of its walls, Tina. It's important because of the memories inside it. Yours, mine, your father's. The love we built there. You wanted to sell it because you never understood what it stood for. She wiped her face, shaking her head. I thought I was helping you. No, I said gently. You were helping your greed, and now you have to live with it. We sat in silence. Outside, the waves rolled in steady rhythm, the sky beginning to darken. Finally, she whispered, We have nowhere to go, Mom. The buyers are taking possession next week. We'll be out on the street. I watched her closely. There was sincerity in her voice, but not remorse, only desperation. Then I hope, I said, you learn how it feels to lose something you thought was yours. She stood abruptly, anger flashing through her tears. You're heartless. No, I said calmly. I'm just done being your victim. She stormed toward the door, but before she left, I called out, Tina. She turned. Your father once told me you'd either inherit our strength or our stubbornness. I see now it was both. Use it for something better than this. Her expression softened for a moment, guilt flickering behind the anger. Then she was gone. Through the window, I watched her run back to the car, slam the door, and bury her face in her hands. Derek started the engine but didn't drive off right away. For a long moment, the two of them just sat there in silence, framed by the fading light. Then they pulled away slowly, the sound of gravel crunching under their tires fading into the distance. I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at the empty road, my heart heavy and strangely quiet. Justice felt right, but it didn't feel good. That night, after Tina and Derek drove away, the house felt too big. The air itself seemed to echo, every creak in the floorboards, every slow breath of the ocean outside. I'd spent so many years in this place surrounded by laughter and footsteps, by the clatter of dishes and the hum of my husband's old radio. But now it was just me and the sound of waves breaking against the shore. Soft, steady, almost like a heartbeat fading in the distance. I made myself a cup of tea I didn't really want and sat by the window, watching the tide crawl up the sand. It was nearly midnight when I realized I hadn't turned a single light on. The house was dark, except for the moonlight spilling through the curtains. That cold, silver kind of light that makes everything look a little lonelier than it really is. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel betrayed. I just felt empty. You think that standing up for yourself will make you feel strong, and it does for a while. But no one tells you that victory has its own kind of silence. When the shouting ends, when the storm settles, you're left staring at the wreckage, the kind that isn't made of wood or paper, but of people you once loved. I kept replaying our conversation in my mind. The way her voice cracked when she said she had nowhere to go. The tears, the anger, the way she looked at me, not like her mother, but like her enemy. I could still hear her last words. You're heartless. Maybe she believed that. Maybe part of me did too. When Charles was alive, he always handled things with patience. He was the soft-spoken kind, the kind who believed love could fix anything if you gave it enough time. But I learned the hard way that love, left unchecked, can also become permission. Permission to be used, permission to be disrespected. I took a deep breath and whispered to the photo of him on the mantel. You'd hate how this turned out, wouldn't you? His smiling face stared back at me, forever frozen in that one perfect moment from our 20th anniversary. His arm around my shoulder, the sea behind us, the future still bright. I set my cup down beside his picture and said, "But you'd be proud too. I didn't let her take what you built." The next morning, I woke early. The light came through the blinds in soft stripes, and for the first time in a while, I felt a strange calm. The kind that only comes after a long cry, even though I hadn't shed a tear. I went outside to the porch with my tea and watched the waves. The world had moved on like nothing happened. Birds sang, a couple jogged down the beach. The mail truck passed with its usual squeaky brakes. Life doesn't stop for your heartbreak. It just keeps breathing without you for a bit, until you learn how to catch up again. Later that afternoon, I drove into town to pick up groceries. I didn't plan on seeing anyone, but it's a small town. Word spreads faster than wind on the water. When I walked into the store, the whispers started. "That's her. She's the one whose daughter tried to sell her house." Can you imagine? Your own child? They tried to be subtle, but there's no such thing as subtle in a town that's built on gossip. The cashier, a sweet young woman named Abby, looked at me with those wide, pitying eyes. "How are you holding up, Mrs. Carter?" I smiled faintly. "I'm holding," she nodded, lowering her voice. "People are talking, but everyone knows you did the right thing. My mama said she'd have done worse if it were her daughter." I thanked her and paid for my things. As I walked out, I realized something unexpected. I didn't care what anyone thought. Not the gossipers, not the sympathizers, not even the ones who quietly admired me for what I'd done. Because this wasn't about reputation. It was about survival. When I got back home, I placed the groceries on the counter, turned on the kettle, and stood for a while in the stillness of the kitchen. There's a strange peace that comes after the storm. Not happiness exactly, but something close. A steady sort of knowing that you made it through, even if you lost something along the way. That night, I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the pictures, the furniture, all the things that carried pieces of the life I'd built. The ghosts of my husband's laughter, the echo of Tina's teenage tantrums, the quiet Sundays filled with nothing but the smell of pancakes and sea air. It all came back in fragments, bittersweet and beautiful. When I finally reached the porch, I sat down and whispered, "I forgive you, Tina." But forgiveness doesn't mean the door stays open. The waves kept rolling, indifferent, eternal. Somewhere in the distance, a ship horn echoed, long, low, and haunting. And for the first time since this whole thing began, I let myself cry. Not for the house, not for the betrayal, but for the little girl who used to run to me barefoot in the sand shouting, "Mama, look what I found!" The girl who disappeared somewhere between growing up and growing cold. The letter arrived without warning, tucked between bills and a grocery flyer. I nearly tossed it aside until I noticed the handwriting. Firm, masculine, too deliberate to be Tina's. I didn't even have to read the return address to know it was from Derek. I stood there for a long time, turning the envelope over in my hands. The sun was coming through the window, catching the gold trim of my coffee mug, and for a brief moment I wondered if I should just burn it unopened. But curiosity has its own gravity. When I finally tore it open, the smell of his cologne hit me faintly. Expensive, synthetic, the kind of scent that always seemed to follow a man who wanted to smell richer than he was. "Mrs. Carter, I owe you an apology. You don't have to believe it. But I never meant for things to go this far. Tina was heartbroken about how distant you'd become. I thought if we could sell the beach house, maybe it would force you to let go of the past, to start fresh with her. It was my idea, not hers. You have every right to hate me, but please don't hate your daughter. She's not built for loss the way you are. She's breaking more than she lets on. I'll take full responsibility for what happened. I'll find a way to fix it. Derek, I read it twice, maybe 3 times. My hands trembled, but not from anger, from something heavier. Pity. The kind you feel when someone realizes too late that their game cost them everything. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. Then I set it in the drawer with Charles' old letters, not because it belonged there, but because I wanted to remember that even lies can come wrapped in regret. By the end of that week, the story had spread through town like wildfire. You can't keep a secret in a coastal town, not one with a population smaller than a high school. Everyone knew by then that my daughter had tried to sell my house behind my back. At the grocery store, at the post office, at the cafe, people looked at me differently. Some with sympathy, some with curiosity, and a few with the kind of quiet admiration reserved for women who've finally stood up for themselves. At the hair salon, I overheard one woman whisper, "Bless her heart. She must have been devastated," another replied. "Well, she handled it better than I would have. I'd have had that girl arrested." I pretended not to listen. I just sat under the dryer, flipping through a magazine I wasn't really reading. Let them talk, I thought. Let them make their judgments. They weren't here when I was counting the years in sighs and sacrifices. They didn't know what it cost to finally say no to your own child. Still, the whispers hurt. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true in their own way. I was devastated. And yes, I had handled it quietly. Maybe too quietly. The night after that salon visit, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was one of Derek's business associates, apparently a mutual acquaintance of someone in town. "Mrs. Carter," the man said cautiously. "I heard what happened. I just wanted to tell you that Derek's lost his license. He won't be selling anything for a while." I thanked him, hung up, and sat for a long time in the silence that followed. Losing his license meant losing his livelihood. Losing Tina's trust meant losing the last anchor they had. It was the kind of collapse that doesn't happen overnight. It's slow, deliberate, like the tide erasing footprints one by one. A few days later, I went for a walk along the pier. The locals nodded politely, some even offered small smiles. A few tried to talk, but I wasn't ready for their sympathy. I just wanted the sound of the water again. Something steady, something that didn't judge. As I leaned against the railing, I caught a glimpse of two young women talking nearby. I heard my name, hushed but audible. "Did you hear? Her daughter sold the wrong house? No way." Mama says it's karma." I smiled faintly and kept walking. Maybe it was. But if it was karma, then it came with a high price. Because justice has a way of collecting more than what's owed. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, I sat on my porch swing and opened my old photo album. Tina's graduation picture was still there, her smile wide, her eyes bright with ambition. I traced her face with my thumb, and for the first time since all this began, I whispered, "I still love you, baby, even if I can't trust you." It wasn't forgiveness yet, not fully, but it was a start. A week later, a small envelope arrived, this time addressed in Tina's handwriting. It wasn't thick like Derek's letter, just a single folded note inside. "Mom, you don't have to write back. I just wanted you to know we moved out of the city. Derek's looking for work. We're staying with a friend for now. I think about what I did every day, and I hate myself for it. You were right. I didn't read the papers. I didn't read a lot of things, actually. I didn't read the look on your face when you realized what I was doing. I didn't read what love really meant. I'm sorry. Tina." I held the letter close, feeling a tear slip down my cheek before I could stop it. For the first time, I believed her. The drive to the beach house took just under 3 hours, but it felt longer, maybe because my mind replayed every word from Tina's letter on a loop. The way she'd written, "I didn't read what love really" meant kept echoing in my head like the chorus of a song I didn't want to forget. By the time I reached the coast, the fog had rolled in thick and low, blanketing everything in gray. The air smelled like salt and rain, and for a brief second, it felt like stepping into another lifetime. When I unlocked the front door, the familiar creak of the hinges greeted me. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old memories, the scent of my husband's hands after a day of carpentry. I set my bag down, walked into the living room, and felt that strange mix of comfort and grief that only comes from surviving something that tried to break you. I didn't expect to find another letter waiting. It was sitting neatly on the kitchen counter, weighed down by a seashell, one of the pink ones Tina used to collect as a child. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting was Derek's again. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Something in me wanted to toss it into the trash, but another part, the part that still wanted to understand, told me to read. Mrs. Carter, I wanted to send this sooner, but I wasn't sure it would matter anymore. You were right about me. I thought I could outsmart you. I thought I could fix my mistakes before you ever noticed. I told myself it was business, not betrayal, but I see now how foolish that was. I thought money could clean the mess I'd made. It never did. Tina's been quiet lately. She cries at night when she thinks I'm asleep. I've never seen her this broken. She doesn't hate you, even though she wants to. I think she just hates herself. I know you probably don't care, but I wanted you to know I'm leaving. I got a job offer in Atlanta. I told Tina to stay with a friend for a while, to take time to figure out who she is without me pulling the strings. You don't have to forgive her. But please, don't let her carry all of this alone. You and I both know she's not strong enough to live with that kind of guilt forever. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve what we did to you. Derek set the letter down and stood there for a while, staring at the kitchen tiles. The rain began to tap softly against the windows, and the ocean roared in the distance. For all his arrogance, Derek had finally written something honest. It wasn't redemption, but it was recognition, and maybe that counted for something. I thought about Tina, how she must have looked sitting in some borrowed room, her pride crumbling under the weight of regret. I'd waited so long for her to admit she'd been wrong, but now that she had, I didn't feel the victory I'd imagined. Just a quiet ache. I walked to the window and looked out over the beach. The sand was damp, the sky heavy with clouds. In the distance, the tide was pulling in, steady and unrelenting. This house had seen it all. Laughter, love, betrayal. And now, something close to peace. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled out a notepad, and began to write. Not to Derek, not even to Tina, but to myself. You did what you had to do. You didn't destroy your family. You just refused to let them destroy you. You can love people without giving them your life to burn. And forgiveness isn't about letting them back in. It's about letting yourself move on. When I finished, I tore the page out and placed it under Derek's letter. Maybe one day Tina would find it. Maybe she wouldn't. But I wanted it to be there. Proof that love can survive even when trust doesn't. Later that evening, I built a small fire in the old stone fireplace. I sat there watching the flames flicker against the walls, listening to the hiss of rain on the roof. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt alive again. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. When I woke up the next morning, the storm had cleared. The sunlight poured through the windows, scattering across the floor like it was blessing the house all over again. I walked outside, barefoot, and let the cold sand sink beneath my feet. The ocean stretched out endlessly before me, powerful, steady, and forgiving. And as I stood there, I whispered into the wind, "Thank you, Charles. You built something stronger than betrayal." The morning after I read Derek's letter, I walked through every room of the beach house slowly, as if reintroducing myself to an old friend. The floorboards creaked under my feet, the smell of salt and dust mingled in the air, and for the first time, the house didn't feel haunted by what happened. It felt alive again, like it was waiting for me to give it a new story. I touched the wooden beams Charles had carved himself, still smooth after all these years. His initials were etched faintly near the stair rail, C+M, Arv, 1979. I ran my fingers over them and smiled. He'd built this home with his own hands, brick by brick, promise by promise. I realized then that I'd spent so much time protecting it from loss that I'd forgotten how to live in it. I made a pot of coffee, opened the windows, and let the sea breeze rush through. The curtains billowed like sails, and the sunlight spilled across the walls, warm and forgiving. I stood there for a while, breathing it all in, and for the first time since everything began, I felt something unfamiliar, peace. That day, I decided what to do with the house. For months, people in town had been whispering about how I'd taught my daughter a lesson. Some said I was cold, others said I was brave. But I didn't want this house to be remembered as a monument to revenge. I wanted it to be remembered as a place of healing. For others, and maybe in time for me, too. So I called Mr. Jacobs again. "I'm ready," I told him. He chuckled softly. "Ready for what, Marjorie?" "To make this place matter again," I said. He came over the next morning, carrying a fresh set of papers and his ever-patient smile. Together we set up the Carter Coastal Retreat Fund, a small non-profit trust under the same legal umbrella that had protected the house. It would serve as a temporary retreat for widowed women, single mothers, and anyone who needed a quiet place to start over. When we finished signing everything, he looked up at me and said, "Charles would have been proud, you know," I smiled. He always said this house was built for love, not ownership. Over the next few weeks, I worked on the house from sunrise to sunset. I repainted the porch railings white, replaced the worn curtains with soft linen ones, and filled the living room with small touches of warmth. Seashell vases, framed quotes, wildflowers from the dunes. The neighbors noticed, of course. One morning, Abby, the young cashier from the grocery store, stopped by with a plate of muffins. "I heard you're opening this place up," she said, smiling shyly. "That's beautiful, Mrs. Carter. We could use more kindness around here." I thanked her and told her to take a look around. When she walked into the living room, she gasped softly. "It feels like peace in here," she whispered. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun sink into the water, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. I could almost hear Charles's voice beside me, low, calm, steady. "You turned pain into purpose, Marge. That's what strength really looks like." A few weeks later, the first group arrived, 3 women from out of town. One had recently lost her husband. Another was escaping a bad marriage. The third just needed quiet after a long year of caring for her sick mother. They came with tired eyes and heavy hearts, and by the end of the week, they were laughing on the porch, sharing stories over tea. I watched them from the window one evening and felt something inside me loosen. The knot of bitterness I'd been carrying for months. It didn't unravel all at once, but it started to soften. One of the women, a soft-spoken lady named Lorraine, took my hand before she left. "You don't know what this place did for me," she said. "You gave me space to breathe again," I smiled. "That's what it's here for." After they left, I walked down to the shore and stood barefoot in the sand. The wind tugged gently at my hair, the waves kissed my ankles, and I thought, maybe healing doesn't come from getting even. Maybe it comes from building something no one can take away. The house behind me glowed warm in the fading light. I could hear the soft hum of the wind chimes Charles had hung decades ago. Their music mingled with the sea breeze, a melody of closure, forgiveness, and something new being born out of the old. I looked back once more before heading inside. "You were right, Charles," I whispered. "This house will always be our safe shore. But now, it's everyone's." That night, I fell asleep with the windows open, the sound of waves rolling in steady rhythm. For the first time in a long, long while, I dreamed of nothing painful, just the sea, the sun and laughter drifting through the air. The beach house still stands, sunlight on the porch, laughter in the rooms, waves whispering at the shore. Only now, it belongs to the people who know the worth of what can't be bought.